Inside a diner reeking of burnt coffee, industrial bleach, and stale rain, Dominic sat holed up in the back booth. He pressed a bruised knuckle against his jaw, desperately waiting for the painkillers to take effect. Suddenly, a sticky, abnormally warm hand tugged at his rolled-up sleeve. Glancing down, he found himself staring into a pair of mismatched hazel eyes, the exact same eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every damn morning. Clutching a plastic dinosaur, the little boy pointed a chubby finger at the jagged anchor inked into Dominic's forearm and whispered, "You have Daddy's drawing." The neon sign outside the window flickered a dying hum of red light that pulsed against the wet asphalt. Dominic Rossi didn't frequent diners that smelled like old fry grease in desperation, but a bullet grazing your ribs and a turf war bleeding into the streets of the South Side dictated a change in routine. He was bleeding exhausted, and the cheap black coffee tasted like copper in his mouth. He kept his left arm on the table, the sleeve of his dark button-down rolled to the elbow to keep the fabric from sticking to the drying blood of a superficial scrape. The muscle there twitched. He was an alpha operating on fumes and adrenaline, his senses dialed to a paranoid high. Every scrape of a chair, every clatter of silverware sent a spike of warning down his spine. Then came the tug. It wasn't a threat. It was a pressure so light Dominic almost dismissed it as a draft. He shifted his gaze, the lethal practice drop of his shoulders halting halfway. A kid. 4, maybe 5 years old. Scuffed sneakers, mismatched socks, one red, one blue. The boy had a smear of dried ketchup on his cheek and was holding a mangled green plastic Tyrannosaurus Rex. Behind him, peeking nervously around the edge of the cracked vinyl booth, was a second boy. Identical. Same messy mop of dark hair, same slightly too big thrift store t-shirt. Dominic didn't do kids. Kids were liabilities loud and fragile. He opened his mouth to tell them to get lost, to find whatever exhausted mother had let them wander off. But the boy didn't ask for a quarter. He didn't ask for a napkin. He pointed his plastic dinosaur directly at Dominic's exposed forearm. "You have Daddy's drawing," the kid said. His voice was high, a little raspy, completely unbothered by the fact that he was talking to a man who had less than 2 hours ago broken a rival enforcer's jaw with a tire iron. Dominic froze. His lungs stopped pulling in air. He looked down at his arm. The tattoo was ugly. It was an anchor tangled in jagged, uneven lines of barbed wire. The ink was slightly blown out, sitting heavy under the skin. It wasn't the work of a professional. It was the work of a terrified, shaking 20-year-old Omega sitting in the back of a safe house using a rigged needle and India ink to brand the man he loved before everything went to hell. What did you say?" Dominic's voice was a gravelly scrape. He tried to moderate his tone, tried to pull back the heavy, suffocating scent of ozone and burnt wood that naturally bled off him when he was stressed. The second twin shuffled forward, emboldened by his brother. "Daddy has that on his shoulder. It's a boat thing." Dominic's pulse kicked into a violent, irregular rhythm against his ribs. The diner faded. The hum of the neon sign vanished. He leaned in entirely involuntarily, his alpha biology overriding his rational mind. He inhaled. Underneath the smell of the diner, underneath the ketchup and the cheap artificial strawberry scent of children's shampoo, there was something else. It was faint, buried, almost entirely suppressed. But Dominic would know that scent if he were buried 6 feet in the dirt. Cardamom, white pepper, a sharp, crisp snowfall. It was a diluted genetic echo. It was Gabriel. "Where is your dad?" Dominic asked. The words felt too large for his mouth. His hands, usually so steady they could dismantle a Glock blindfolded, trembled. He curled them into fists, driving his fingernails into his palms to ground himself in the sharp pain. "Bathroom." The first twin chirped, entirely unaware that he had just dismantled a mob boss with 5 words. "He got sick. Again." Dominic's chest tightened. Gabriel was here, in this filthy, fluorescent-lit purgatory. He looked at the boys again, really looked at them, the jawline. the slight stubborn tilt of the chin, the dark, thick hair. They were a terrifying amalgamation of Gabriel's softness and his own harsh, unforgiving genetics. Twins. 5 years ago, Gabriel had vanished, just slipped out of the heavily guarded penthouse, leaving behind his suppressants, his phone, and a cold bed. Dominic had torn the city apart. He had burned rival warehouses to the ground. Tortured informants spent millions. Nothing. Gabriel was a ghost. And now 2 little ghosts were staring at him, smelling like cardamom and strawberry shampoo. The door to the diner's restrooms creaked open on rusted hinges. Dominic looked up. There he was. Gabriel looked terrible. The observation wasn't born of malice, but of a raw, agonizing ache. He was too thin. The oversized, faded gray sweater he wore hung off his collarbones. His hair, once glossy and perfectly kept, was tied back in a messy fraying knot. Deep bruised shadows lived under his eyes, and his skin had a pallor that spoke of chronic exhaustion and cheap black market suppressants slowly poisoning his system. Gabriel wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, letting out a shaky breath before lifting his gaze. He saw the twins first standing by a booth in the back. Annoyance and panic flashed across his face. "Leo, Toby, I told you to stay in the—" Then Gabriel's eyes tracked up from his children to the man sitting in the booth. The silence that fell between them was a physical weight. It was the crushing pressure of deep water. Dominic watched the exact moment Gabriel's brain registered reality. The Omega's pupils dilated so wide his eyes looked black. The scent of cardamom spiked, instantly soured by the sharp metallic tang of sheer, unadulterated terror. Gabriel stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the dirty tile wall of the bathroom corridor with a dull thud. "Dom—" Gabriel breathed. The syllable was a weapon slicing straight through the ambient noise of the diner. Dominic stood up. He didn't realize he had moved until his boots hit the linoleum. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and imposing, and the movement caused the few other patrons in the diner to instinctively shrink into their seats. Gabriel didn't hesitate. Survival instinct honed by 5 years of running hijacked his fragile frame. He lunged forward, grabbing both twins by the collars of their shirts. "Hey!" the boy with the dinosaur protested. "He has the boat thing, Daddy." "Jehu, we're leaving?" Gabriel hissed, his voice trembling so violently it cracked. He didn't look at Dominic. He didn't dare. He hoisted Toby onto his hip, dragged Leo by the hand, and bolted for the glass doors. "Gabe, stop!" Dominic's voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, resonant command that vibrated in the floorboards, an alpha's order. Gabriel visibly flinched, his shoulders curling inward, fighting the biological urge to submit. He pushed through the glass door, stumbling out into the damp, freezing night air. Dominic threw a $100 bill onto the table and stalked after them. The pain in his ribs flared sharp and blinding, but he barely felt it. The predator inside him, dormant and hollowed out for half a decade, was suddenly awake, tearing at his ribs, demanding he close the distance. He pushed out into the street. The rain had started again, a fine, cold mist. Gabriel was rushing down the sidewalk, practically dragging the 4-year-old beside him. The limp in Gabriel's step was new. Dominic clocked it instantly, a stiffness in the left hip. "What happened to you?" "Gabriel." Dominic closed the distance in a dozen long strides. He didn't grab him. He knew better than to touch a cornered animal, let alone a cornered Omega protecting its young. He stepped in front of them, blocking the narrow alleyway leading to the bus stop. Gabriel jerked to a halt, pulling the children behind his legs. He looked up the streetlights, catching the rain on his pale face. He looked feral. His chest heaved, and the smell of his fear was choking. "Don't," Gabriel gasped out. "Don't touch them. Please, Dom. I'm begging you. Kill me, but don't touch them." The words hit Dominic like a tire iron to the teeth. Kill me. Is that what Gabriel thought? That he would hurt them? Hurt him? "I'm not going to hurt you," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a rough, jagged whisper. He held his hands up, palms open, showing he was unarmed. The rain slicked his dark hair to his forehead. I'm not Gabe, look at me. Gabriel shook his head, pressing back against the damp brick wall of the alley. The twins were quiet now, picking up on their father's absolute panic. Toby, the one on Gabriel's hip, buried his face in the gray sweater, crying softly. You're dead, Gabriel whispered rapidly, a manic edge to his voice. We're dead. You found us. You're going to take them. You're going to take them to that house, and you're going to turn them into monsters just like you. The accusation stung a raw slash of truth. Dominic was a monster. He ran a syndicate built on extortion, blood, and fear. It was exactly why Gabriel had run. They're mine, Dominic said. It wasn't a question. They're mine. Gabriel snarled back, a sudden flash of teeth, a desperate protective fury cutting through the terror. I birthed them. I fed them. I hid them. You don't get to claim them because of biology, Dominic. You robbed me of 5 years, Dominic said, the anger finally bleeding into his tone, hot and bitter. You faked your death. I buried an empty casket, Gabe. I grieved you until there was nothing left of me. And you've been here, living in this. He gestured vaguely to the decaying street, the overflowing trash cans, the grime. I kept them safe, Gabriel shouted, his voice cracking. He shifted Toby's weight, wincing as his bad hip took the strain. Dominic saw the wince. He saw the frayed cuffs of the sweater, the cheap shoes on the kid's feet. He smelled the chemical taint of the blockers ruining Gabriel's liver. This wasn't safety. This was a slow, grinding starvation. Where do you live? Dominic asked. The Alpha Command was gone. It was just a tired man asking a question. No. Gabe, it's raining. The kids are freezing. Where do you live? I am not taking you to my home. Dominic took a half step forward. Gabriel pressed so hard against the brick, he looked like he was trying to phase through it. You have 2 choices, Dominic said, lowering his voice to a pitch only Gabriel could hear over the rain. You let me walk you home so we can talk inside like civilized human beings. Or I make a phone call, 3 black SUVs pull up to this curb in 4 minutes, and we have this conversation in a secure room at the estate. Choose. It was a bluff. Half a bluff. But Gabriel knew Dominic's world. He knew the power Dominic wielded. Gabriel's shoulders dropped. The fight drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, vibrating exhaustion. He closed his eyes, a single tear mixing with the rain on his cheek. 3 blocks, Gabriel whispered. Follow us. The apartment building was a decaying monolith of concrete and rust. The elevator was broken, a permanent out-of-order sign taped over the buttons. Gabriel led the way up 4 flights of stairs. Dominic walked 2 steps behind him, hyper-aware of the way Gabriel favored his right leg on the climb, the heavy-labored breathing of the Omega, carrying a growing 4-year-old. Dominic wanted to reach out. He wanted to take the boy from Gabriel's arms to ease the burden, but he kept his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his knuckles white. The air in the stairwell smelled of boiled cabbage, damp dog, and stale cigarette smoke. It made Dominic's skin crawl. This was where his mate had been living. This was where his children were raised. Gabriel stopped at door 4B. The wood around the deadbolt was splintered, a clear sign it had been kicked in at some point and poorly repaired. Gabriel fumbled with a ring of cheap brass keys. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped them. The keys clattered against the dirty concrete floor. Gabriel let out a small, fractured sob of frustration and bent down awkward with Toby still on his hip. Dominic moved faster. He scooped up the keys, his large, calloused fingers brushing against Gabriel's cold, thin knuckles. The spark of contact was electric, a sudden violent flare of dormant mate bonds that made both of them flinch. Dominic smelled the burnt sugar of Gabriel's distress. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. Gabriel hurried inside, quickly setting Toby down. Shoes off, he muttered to the twins, rote habit taking over. Go to your room, put on dry socks. The boys hesitated, looking back at the giant of a man filling their doorway. Go! Gabriel set his voice sharp. The kids scrambled down a short, dark hallway, a door clicking shut behind them. Dominic stepped inside and closed the front door. The lock clicked, sounding loud in the small space. The apartment was suffocatingly tiny. The kitchen and living room were one cramped square. The furniture was secondhand and mismatched: a sagging brown sofa, a low coffee table covered in crayons and construction paper, a small television with a cracked bezel. But it was painfully clean, scrubbed raw. The faint smell of cheap bleach couldn't entirely mask the pervasive scent of old water damage in the walls. Gabriel stood in the center of the kitchen area, putting the kitchen island, a cheap, wobbly piece of particle board, between himself and Dominic. He wrapped his arms around his own waist, a defensive, closed-off posture. "Well?" Gabriel said, a bitter, cynical smile twisting his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "You've seen it. The grand estate. Are you satisfied? Are you going to shoot me now, or do you want to berate me first?" Dominic stood by the door, the sheer size of him making the room feel even smaller. He looked at the details. The single small space heater in the corner, the lock on the refrigerator door, the threadbare blanket neatly folded on the couch, which Dominic realized instantly was where Gabriel slept, so the kids could have the bedroom. Something broke inside Dominic. A structural support he had relied on for years just snapped. He was angry. He was furious. He wanted to scream at Gabriel for the theft of his children, for the grief that had turned Dominic into a ruthless, hollowed-out machine. But looking at the dark circles under Gabriel's eyes, the defensive hunch of his shoulders, the anger had nowhere to land. "Why, Gabe?" Dominic asked softly. The quietness of his voice seemed to rattle Gabriel more than a shout would have. "Why did I leave?" Gabriel let out a wet, humorless laugh. "Are you serious? Do you remember the night I left Dom? Do you remember what you came home covered in?" Dominic swallowed hard. He remembered. The blood of the Moretti brothers. It had been a massacre. "I was pregnant," Gabriel whispered, his voice shaking. "I found out that morning. I was going to tell you over dinner. And then you walked in. You smelled like copper and death, and you didn't even blink. You washed your hands, kissed my forehead, and asked what was to eat." Gabriel gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. "I realized then, if I had those babies in your house, they would either end up with a bullet in their heads before they turned 10, or they would become the ones pulling the trigger. I couldn't let my children become you." The truth was a knife slipping perfectly between Dominic's ribs, far more painful than the bullet graze. "So you brought them here," Dominic stated, gesturing to the peeling wallpaper. "To starve, to live in fear of the landlord or whoever kicked your damn door in." "We survive." Gabriel snapped his chin, tilting up, a flash of the old, defiant Gabriel. "We don't live in a mansion, but my kids don't know what a body bag looks like. They don't know the sound of a silencer." Gabriel leaned forward, his voice dropping into a desperate plea. "Please, Dominic, I'll do whatever you want. If you want to punish me, hurt me, take it out on me, but leave them here. Let me keep them." Dominic looked at his mate. He looked at the man who had torn his own life apart to protect two innocent souls from the darkness Dominic carried. Dominic took a step forward. Gabriel scrambled backward, hitting the cheap stove, his breath hitching in panic. But Dominic didn't reach for him. Instead, he reached into his jacket. Gabriel squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away, bracing for a weapon, a blow, anything. Dominic pulled out a heavy black leather wallet. He set it on the counter. Then he reached to his waist, slowly, deliberately. He unholstered his firearm, a matte black Sig Sauer. He popped the magazine out, cleared the chamber, and set the heavy weapon on the kitchen counter, pushing it away from himself. He took out his secondary knife, setting it next to the gun. He systematically disarmed himself, placing the tools of his violence under the fluorescent kitchen light. Gabriel opened his eyes, staring at the pile of weaponry, confused and wary. Dominic took 3 steps back, pressing his shoulders against the front door, putting maximum distance between them in the tiny room. He sank down, sliding down the doorframe until he was sitting on the cold floor, his knees bent, making himself as small and unthreatening as a man of his size possibly could. "I'm not taking them." Dominic said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't let himself feel in 5 years. And I'm not punishing you. Gabriel stared down at him, his chest heaving, mistrust etched into every line of his face. Then what are you doing? Dominic looked up, his dark eyes locking onto Gabriel's. The cynicism, the mob boss persona, the ruthless alpha, all of it stripped away, leaving only a bruised, exhausted father. I'm staying here, Dominic said quietly, until you trust me enough to let me help. Gabriel stared at the Mafia boss sitting on his scuffed linoleum floor. You can't stay here. The cartel, your men, let them burn, Dominic said, and meant every single word. The empire didn't matter. The throne didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was breathing in the faint scent of cardamom and the sound of 2 little boys in the next room wearing mismatched socks. Let it all burn. I'm not leaving this room. The compressor of the ancient refrigerator kicked on with a sound like a dying tractor. Dominic blinked his eyes open. His neck was brutally stiff, the vertebrae grinding together as he shifted against the door frame. The thin, drafty gap beneath the front door had blown cold city air against his lower back all night. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but the loudest agony came from his right side. The bullet graze he had ignored yesterday was now a throbbing, localized fire against his ribs. The cheap fabric of his ruined Tom Ford shirt glued to the wound with dried blood. He didn't move. He kept his breathing shallow, letting his eyes adjust to the gray morning light filtering through the single dirt-streaked window. Gabriel was awake. He was sitting at the wobbly kitchen island wearing the same oversized sweater from the night before. A mug of black coffee steamed between his hands. He wasn't drinking it. He was just staring at Dominic's disarmed weapons, still sitting exactly where Dominic had pushed them. The Sig Sauer, the combat knife, the wallet. You snore, Gabriel said. His voice was a flat, exhausted rasp. Deviated septum, Dominic replied, his voice gravelly from sleep. Broke my nose 2 years ago. Gabriel's eyes flicked to him, cold and assessing. Rival family saw ice slipping off a roof ledge in January. It was a stupid, mundane truth, and it hung in the air awkwardly. Gabriel looked back down at the coffee. The scent in the apartment was a chaotic mix of stale rainwater, the sharp tang of cheap coffee grounds, and the heavy underlying static of Gabriel's anxiety. A door creaked down the short hallway. 2 sets of footsteps pattered across the worn carpet, then slapped onto the kitchen linoleum. Leo and Toby stopped at the edge of the kitchen, staring at the giant man blocking their front door. They were in pajamas. Leo in faded Batman bottoms, Toby in a plain gray shirt that was 2 sizes too big. Is he dead? Toby whispered to his brother, clutching a frayed blanket. No, Leo said, stepping forward. His eyes are open. Dominic slowly pushed himself up, suppressing a wince as his shirt peeled away from the scab on his ribs. He stayed seated on the floor, keeping his center of gravity low. He looked at the twins. In the daylight, the resemblance was physically painful. They had his jaw, his dark hair, but their eyes, that hazel-shifting color, were entirely Gabriel. Good morning, Dominic said, keeping his voice a low rumble. Leo marched up to him, stopping exactly 3 feet away. Why are you sleeping on the floor? We have a couch. The floor is good for my back, Dominic lied smoothly. You're the man from the diner, Leo stated, pointing an accusing finger. You have Daddy's boat. Leo, come here, Gabriel said sharply, panic spiking in his scent. Leo ignored him. He took another step toward Dominic, tilting his head. Are you a gangster? Jimmy downstairs says gangsters wear black suits and shoot people. Are you going to shoot Jimmy? He stole my ball. Dominic's chest hitched with a sudden bizarre urge to laugh. It felt like glass in his lungs. He looked at Gabriel, whose face was completely pale knuckles, white around his coffee mug. I don't shoot people who steal balls, Dominic said seriously, looking back at the boy. But I can talk to Jimmy if you want. No. Gabriel interrupted, standing up so fast the stool scraped harshly against the floor. Nobody's talking to Jimmy. Leo, Toby, go get dressed. We have to go to the store before my shift. The boys groaned but turned back toward the hallway. Dominic watched them go, his heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against his bruised ribs. He slowly climbed to his feet, leaning his weight against the door. He felt dizzy. Blood loss, adrenaline crash, and 0 calories for the last 24 hours were catching up to him. "You have a shift?" Dominic asked, trying to keep the judgment out of his tone. "People who don't run extortion rackets have to work." "Dominic," Gabriel snapped, moving to the sink to dump his cold coffee. "I work the counter at a dry cleaner 4 blocks from here. It pays under the table." Dominic did the math. A cash-in-hand job meant no social security trail, no background checks. It was how ghosts survived. It also meant Gabriel was making less than minimum wage, standing on his feet all day with a bad hip. Dominic stepped away from the door. He walked over to the kitchen island and picked up his heavy leather wallet. He flipped it open, pulling out a thick stack of $100 bills, walking around money for a man in his position. There was easily $5,000 in the clip. He set the stack on the particle board counter next to Gabriel's empty mug. "Call in sick," Dominic said. Gabriel stared at the money. He didn't look relieved. He looked insulted. "I don't want your blood money," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I don't want anything from you. I told you I survived just fine." Dominic looked around the cramped, peeling kitchen. He looked at the lock on the refrigerator. He looked at the fading bruises under Gabriel's eyes. "This isn't survival, Gabe," Dominic said softly. "This is a slow death. Take the money, buy them groceries, buy yourself a decent winter coat. And then what?" Gabriel whirled around, stepping into Dominic's space. The scent of distressed cardamom was overwhelming now. "I take your money and then I owe you. Then you buy them a toy and then you pay for a better apartment, and suddenly we're back in the penthouse with armed guards at the door and me scrubbing blood out of your shirts. No. I draw the line here." Dominic absorbed the anger. He deserved it. He deserved every ounce of venom Gabriel had to spit. "Fine," Dominic said, sliding the money back into his wallet. "Then we're going to the grocery store, together." The neighborhood in the harsh daylight was even worse than it had looked in the rain. It was a concrete canyon of neglected tenements, pawn shops, and liquor stores with barred windows. Dominic walked slightly behind Gabriel and the twins. He was a jarring anomaly on this street. Even though his suit jacket was missing and his black dress shirt was wrinkled and stained with dried blood, the cut of his trousers, the shine of his Italian leather boots, and the sheer predatory way he moved screamed money and violence. He was conducting a continuous silent threat assessment. The corner boys. 3 teenagers trading cash for small baggies near the bodega. They eyed Dominic, weighed his size against their numbers, and sharply looked away. The traffic. A rusted sedan creeping too slowly down the block. Dominic's hand instinctively drifted toward his empty waistband before he remembered he had left his Sig Sauer on Gabriel's counter. The environment: broken glass on the sidewalk. Uneven concrete that Gabriel had to carefully navigate to avoid jolting his bad hip. Gabriel was tense, his shoulders hiked up to his ears. He kept a vice-like grip on Toby's hand while Leo skipped ahead, entirely oblivious to the tension vibrating between his parents. "You're scaring people," Gabriel muttered out of the corner of his mouth as they waited for a crosswalk signal. "Good," Dominic said flatly. "It's not good, Dom. We blend in. We stay invisible. You walking behind us looking like you're about to snap someone's neck puts a massive target on our backs." "Anyone who looks at you twice is a target," Dominic replied. Gabriel let out a sharp, frustrated breath. "This is exactly why I left." They entered a discount grocery store. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed relentlessly, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the bruised produce and dented cans. The air smelled of overripe bananas and floor wax. Gabriel grabbed a plastic handbasket. He moved through the aisles with a practiced, rigid efficiency, calculating prices in his head. He picked up store-brand pasta, a dented can of crushed tomatoes, a loaf of cheap white bread. Dominic watched him. He watched Gabriel hesitate over a small plastic container of strawberries, check the price tag, and slowly put it back on the shelf. The alpha in Dominic roared a violent possessive instinct to buy the entire store, to burn down the building, to do something. Instead, he reached past Gabriel, picked up the strawberries, and dropped them into the basket. Gabriel stiffened. "I can't afford those." "I have $5,000 in my pocket, Gabe. Let the kids have strawberries." "I told you." "I know." Dominic cut him off, his voice low, but leaving no room for argument. "No blood money. Consider it a loan with 0 interest. Or consider it me paying child support for the last 5 years. But I'm not watching you put food back." Gabriel clamped his mouth shut, his jaw working, as he stared at the red fruit in the basket. He didn't take them out. They reached the checkout line. It was long, crawling at a glacial pace. A man behind them, thick-necked, smelling of cheap beer and stale sweat, was crowding too close. He bumped his cart aggressively against the back of Gabriel's legs. Gabriel stumbled forward, letting out a sharp gasp of pain as his bad hip took the awkward weight. Dominic moved. He didn't think. It was purely autonomic. In a fraction of a second, Dominic inserted himself between Gabriel and the man. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't even raise his fists. He simply stood up to his full, towering height, closing the distance until he was inches from the man's face. The air pressure in the aisles seemed to drop. Dominic's scent, usually suppressed, flared in a concentrated, terrifying burst of ozone and dark, heavy smoke. "Back up," Dominic said softly. The man blinked, opening his mouth to sneer, to start a fight. But then he looked into Dominic's eyes. He saw the dead hollow calm of a man who had ended lives before breakfast. The man swallowed hard, his bravado evaporating into primitive biological fear. He dragged his cart backward, the wheels squeaking loudly against the linoleum. "My bad, man. Just tight in here." Dominic held his gaze for 2 more seconds, ensuring the submission was complete before turning his back on the threat. He looked down at Gabriel. The Omega was staring at him, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Gabriel wasn't looking at Dominic with fear, but with a complicated, agonizing mixture of anger relief and a desperate, deeply buried recognition. He protected us. The thought hung unspoken in the air between them. "Are you okay?" Dominic asked, his voice returning to its normal, rough baseline. "I'm fine." Gabriel snapped, turning away quickly to put his items on the conveyor belt, but his hands were shaking as he dug crumpled bills out of his pocket. The walk back was silent. The rain had started again, a miserable, freezing drizzle that soaked through Dominic's shirt in seconds. By the time they reached the apartment and Gabriel locked the door behind them, Dominic was shivering. The cold had finally cut through the adrenaline and the painkillers settling deep into his bones. Go watch cartoons." Gabriel told the boys, handing them the carton of strawberries. The twins vanished into their bedroom, the muffled sounds of an animated show bleeding through the thin walls a moment later. Gabriel turned to face Dominic. The Omega dropped the plastic grocery bags onto the counter and crossed his arms. "Take off your shirt." Dominic blinked the command, catching him off guard. "What? Take off your shirt." Gabriel repeated, his voice tight. "I can smell the copper dom. I've been smelling it since you walked into the diner yesterday. You're bleeding." Dominic looked down. His black shirt was soaked from the rain, but an unmissable dark tacky patch clung to his lower right rib cage. "It's a scrape. It's fine." "I'm not having you bleed out on my linoleum," Gabriel said flatly. "Take it off. Sit on the stool." Dominic hesitated, then slowly began unbuttoning his shirt. His fingers were clumsy from the cold. He pulled the ruined fabric off his shoulders, hissing sharply through his teeth as the fabric tore away from the clotted wound. He sat heavily on the wobbly kitchen stool, exposing his torso. Dominic's body was a map of violence. A jagged knife scar ran diagonally across his left pectoral. A puckered bullet wound sat high on his right shoulder. But the newest addition was a nasty deep graze along his lower ribs. It was angry red and actively seeping fresh blood down his flank. Gabriel stood frozen in front of him, a clean, damp towel in his hand. The Omega's eyes tracked over the scars, the new ones that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "You've been busy?" Gabriel whispered, a profound sadness cracking through his cynical armor. "It's a hazardous profession," Dominic replied quietly. Gabriel stepped closer, invading Dominic's personal space. The scent of cardamom spiked rich and warm, washing over Dominic like a physical weight. Gabriel gently pressed the damp towel against the wound. Dominic groaned, his abdominal muscles clenching hard. "Stop moving!" Gabriel ordered his touch surprisingly gentle, despite his harsh tone. "It's dirty. It needs to be cleaned or it's going to get infected." Gabriel moved to the sink, rinsed the towel, and grabbed a small, cheap plastic first aid kit from under the counter. He returned, popping open a bottle of generic rubbing alcohol. "This is going to burn," Gabriel warned. "Just do it." Gabriel poured the alcohol onto a cotton pad and pressed it firmly into the raw tissue. Dominic's breath left him in a violent rush. He gripped the edges of the particle board counter, his knuckles turning stark white, his jaw locked so tight, his teeth ground together. He didn't make a sound, but his entire body went rigid. Gabriel worked quickly, cleaning the dirt and dried blood away. His hands, usually so shaky with anxiety, were entirely steady now. The past, the present. Tailored suits, mahogany desks, private doctors on payroll, bruised ribs, particle board counters rubbing alcohol. The absolute certainty of his power and control over the city. The terrifying vulnerability of sitting bare-chested in front of the mate who ran from him. "You limp," Dominic ground out through the pain, needing to focus on anything other than the fire in his ribs. "Your left hip." Gabriel's hand stuttered for a fraction of a second. He taped a large gauze pad over the cleaned wound. "It's nothing, just stiffness." "Don't lie to me, Gabe." Gabriel stepped back, throwing the bloody cotton pads into the trash can. He gripped the edge of the sink, his back to Dominic. "It's the suppressants," Gabriel said softly to the drain. "The cheap ones. The black market blockers. I have to take triple the dose to hide my scent completely. To hide their scents. It leaches calcium from the bones, causes joint deterioration. My hip is the worst of it." Dominic stared at Gabriel's narrow back. He felt physically sick. The nausea rolled through him darker and heavier than the pain in his ribs. Gabriel was slowly poisoning himself to stay hidden. He was breaking his own bones to protect his children from their father. "Stop taking them," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with an alpha's absolute distress. Gabriel let out a bitter, wet laugh, turning around to face him. Tears were finally spilling over his lower lashes, tracking through the exhaustion on his face. "Stop taking them," Gabriel mocked, swiping angrily at his eyes. "And then what dom my scent blooms? Every unbonded alpha in a 10-mile radius zeroes in on a vulnerable Omega living in a slum. The cartel tracking dogs pick up my scent in 2 days. The Rossi Syndicate realizes their boss's mate isn't dead. Do you know what your enemies would do to my boys if they smelled me? I am here," Dominic said, standing up. He ignored the pulling agony in his side. He stepped into Gabriel's space, crowding him against the sink, but he didn't touch him. He just let his own scent, ozone, dark wood heavy protection wrap around them both. "I'm standing right here. Nobody touches you. Nobody touches them. You can't protect us from your world while keeping us in it," Gabriel cried softly, tilting his head back to look up at Dominic. "That's why I had to leave. I love you, Dominic. God help me, I never stopped loving you, but I love them more." Hearing the words "I love you" after 5 years of silence was a physical blow. Dominic slowly raised his hands. He hesitated, telegraphing his movement so Gabriel could pull away. When Gabriel didn't move, Dominic gently framed Gabriel's face with his large, calloused hands. He swept his thumbs under Gabriel's eyes, catching the tears. "Then I leave the world," Dominic said. Gabriel froze, staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. What? I stepped down. I dismantled the syndicate. I burned the bridges. Dominic looked deeply into those hazel eyes, meant every single word. You told me you wouldn't let your children become me, so I stopped being him. The silence in the cramped kitchen was absolute save for the relentless mechanical drip of the leaky faucet hitting the stainless steel sink. Gabriel stared at Dominic, his hazel eyes wide, searching the Alpha's face for the lie. A Mafia boss didn't just walk away. The Rossi Syndicate was a living, breathing leviathan that consumed everything it touched. You didn't retire from it. You died out of it. You're lying. Gabriel whispered the words, trembling. You can't. Dominic didn't argue. He turned away from the sink, reached for his discarded suit jacket draped over the wobbly stool, and dug into the breast pocket. He pulled out a heavy encrypted satellite phone, a block of black plastic and rubber that looked violently out of place next to Gabriel's cheap dented toaster. Dominic punched in a 12-digit sequence. He pressed speakerphone and set the device flat on the particle board counter. The line rang once, twice. Boss? The voice on the other end was gravelly professional and instantly recognizable to Gabriel. It was Arthur Dominic's underboss, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his body count. Arthur, Dominic said. His voice shifted. The gentle, exhausted father vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, flat baritone that commanded the south side. Gabriel shivered instinctively, wrapping his arms around himself. We located the Moretti safe house on 4th. Arthur reported the sound of a lighter flicking echoing through the speaker. Say the word and I send the cleanup crew. Stand down, Dominic ordered. A pause. Boss. Pull the men back, all of them. Empty the warehouses on the docks, liquidate the offshore holding accounts, and burn the ledgers. The silence stretching over the encrypted frequency was heavy enough to crack concrete. When Arthur finally spoke, the practiced calm was gone. Dominic, what the hell are you talking about? We're 50 hours into a turf war. If we pull back now, they'll slaughter us. Let them take the territory, Dominic said, leaning his weight against the counter, his eyes fixed entirely on Gabriel. I'm done. You can't be done. Arthur's voice spiked a frantic edge, bleeding through the static. You step down now, it's blood in the water. Every cartel, every low-level street gang will take a piece of the syndicate, and they won't stop there. They'll hunt you. You won't survive a week without the family's protection. That's my problem, Dominic said. Here's the transition protocol. Dominic listed the dismantling of his empire with the casual, detached efficiency of a man reading a grocery list. He systematically surrendered his power, his wealth, and his security. The assets surrendered. The dock's control of the East Harbor shipping lanes handed over to the Neutral Commission. The arsenal codes to the underground armories wiped the weapons left for Arthur to distribute or sell. The accounts. 70% of the liquid cash transferred to severance funds for the foot soldiers. The rest burned. The estate. The gates unlocked, the security detail dismissed. You're signing a suicide pact, Arthur hissed over the phone. Well, give me one good reason why you're throwing your life away. Dominic looked at Gabriel. He looked at the bruised, exhausted Omega who had shattered his own body to keep their children away from this exact life. I found my anchor, Dominic said quietly. Do not contact this number again. The Rossi Syndicate is dead. Dominic ended the call. He picked up the thick black phone, walked over to the sink, and methodically smashed it against the heavy porcelain edge until the casing cracked and the motherboard splintered. He dumped the ruined plastic into the trash can. Gabriel's legs gave out. He slid down the front of the kitchen cabinets, hitting the linoleum with a dull thud. He pulled his knees to his chest, burying his face in his hands. He wasn't crying. He was hyperventilating, his thin chest heaving in short, violent spasms. Dominic was on the floor beside him instantly. He didn't crowd him. He sat shoulder to shoulder, letting his heavy, solid presence act as a physical wall between Gabriel and the rest of the world. Breathe, Gabe. Dominic murmured. You're going to get killed. Gabriel gasped, his fingers digging into his own hair. They're going to find us. Without your men. Without the estate. I have safe houses Arthur doesn't know about, Dominic said, keeping his voice a low, steady rumble. Cabins off the grid. Clean money buried in places that don't exist on paper. I built a back door 5 years ago, hoping one day I'd find you and need a way out. Gabriel lifted his head. His eyes were red, the dilated pupils slowly returning to normal. You planned for this? I hoped for it, Dominic corrected. He shifted his weight, suppressing a wince as the graze on his ribs stretched. But right now we have a more pressing issue. Gabriel blinked, disoriented. What? The suppressants. Dominic set his gaze, dropping to Gabriel's hip. You're going to flush the pills down the toilet. Right now. We aren't leaving this apartment until your system is clean. Panic, pure and unadulterated, washed over Gabriel's scent, souring the cardamom. Dom, no. If I stop the blockers, my scent will hit the street in hours. The corner boys will smell me. The landlord, will have to deal with me. Dominic interrupted his jaw, setting into a hard, unforgiving line. I will sit by that front door with my gun in my lap for as long as it takes. Let them smell you. Let them come. But you're not poisoning yourself for another second. The crash hit Gabriel 36 hours later. Dominic had locked the deadbolt, shoved the heavy brown sofa against the front door, and established a perimeter within the four walls of the tiny apartment. He fed the twins, letting them watch an endless loop of cartoons on the cracked television, keeping them distracted while their father's biology waged a violent war against the sudden absence of the black market chemicals. By Tuesday night, the apartment smelled like a dying garden. The heavy artificial barrier of the suppressants was breaking down. Gabriel's natural scent was fighting to the surface, but it was tainted, smelling of burnt leaves, sick sweet sweat, and sharp panic. Dominic sat on the edge of the twin-sized mattress in the bedroom. The single bare bulb overhead cast harsh shadows across Gabriel's face. The Omega was pale, his skin shining, with a sheen of cold sweat shivering so violently his teeth clicked together. Cold. Gabriel mumbled, his eyes squeezed shut, twisting weakly into the thin, scratchy blanket. Dom, it's so cold. I know. Dominic said, his voice stripped of all its rough edges. He soaked a cheap washcloth in a bowl of lukewarm water, sitting on the nightstand, wrung it out, and gently pressed it against Gabriel's burning forehead. Your body is just resetting. You have to sweat it out. Time off. Suppressants. Physical symptom. Dominic's response. 12 hours. Nausea. Deep joint aches. Hydration. Gentle pressure massages on the left hip. 24 hours. Temperature fluctuations, severe anxiety. Grounding techniques releasing steady alpha pheromones to calm. 36 hours. High fever delirium scent blooming. Cold compresses physical guarding of the room. Gabriel let out a sharp, ragged whine, a pure instinctual noise that bypassed his cynical defenses entirely. His hands clamped onto Dominic's forearm, his blunt fingernails digging desperately into the skin directly over the jagged anchor tattoo. They're going to find us, Gabriel deliriously mumbled, thrashing his legs. The joint pain in his hip was radiating, making his muscles lock up. Hide them! Dom, hide the boys! They're safe. Dominic promised, leaning over so his mouth was an inch from Gabriel's ear. He purposely dropped his scent barrier completely. The room instantly filled with the heavy, dominating smell of ozone rain on hot asphalt and dark wood. It was a purely territorial scent designed to blanket an Omega to signal absolute impenetrable safety. I'm right here. Nobody is coming through that door. The thick alpha scent hit Gabriel's compromised system. He took a deep, shuddering gasp, his lungs dragging in the air. Slowly, the violent shivering began to ease. The frantic, terrified edge of his own scent began to mellow the burnt leaves, giving way to the true, clear note of sharp winter cardamom. Gabriel's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy with fever, but the panic was gone, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it looked like it was carved into his bones. "You stayed," Gabriel whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a marveling observation. "I'm not going anywhere," Dominic said, dipping the cloth in the water again. He dragged it carefully down the side of Gabriel's neck, wiping away the sour sweat, feeling the rapid flutter of the Omega's pulse beneath his fingertips. Gabriel turned his face, slightly pressing his cheek against Dominic's large, calloused palm. The gesture was so trusting, so unguarded, it made Dominic's chest ache worse than the gunshot wound. "I was so tired, Dom." Gabriel breathed a tear, slipping free to wet Dominic's hand. "Running, checking the locks, counting the pennies. I was so tired." "You can rest now." Dominic swore, his thumb brushing lightly over Gabriel's cheekbone. "I'll carry the weight." "They have your temper," Gabriel murmured, a faint ghost of a smile touching his dry lips. "Leo threw a toy truck at the wall yesterday because it wouldn't transform." Dominic let out a low, quiet chuckle. "We'll work on that." From the living room, a sudden loud crash echoed, followed immediately by Toby's high-pitched wail. Dominic was on his feet before the sound had fully registered the combat knife he had kept on his belt instantly in his hand. He cleared the short hallway in 2 strides, his heart hammering against his bruised ribs, expecting to see the door kicked in, expecting cartel enforcers. Instead, he found the living room empty of threats. Leo was standing on the coffee table looking horrified while Toby sat on the floor crying and holding his knee. The wobbly particle board kitchen island had finally given up the ghost. It had collapsed entirely, scattering Dominic's discarded gun wallet and the plastic container of strawberries across the cheap linoleum. Dominic stared at the mess, the adrenaline slowly draining out of his system, leaving him lightheaded. He slid the knife back into its sheath. He walked over, kneeling beside Toby. "Let me see." Toby sniffled, looking up at the giant man with a mixture of awe and fear, but he slowly moved his hand. A small red scrape marked his knee where a piece of the falling table had caught him. "I didn't push him," Leo yelled defensively from his perch on the coffee table. "The table just broke." "I know," Dominic said calmly. He reached out with a massive hand and gently ruffled Toby's dark hair. "It's a scrape. You're tough, right?" Toby sniffled, nodding slowly. "Daddy kisses it." Dominic froze. He looked at the 4-year-old, his own identical hazel eyes staring back at him. He swallowed the lump in his throat, leaned forward, and awkwardly gently pressed his lips to the boy's scraped knee. "Better?" Dominic asked gruffly. Toby nodded again, a small smile breaking through the tears. He reached out his sticky fingers, patting Dominic's forearm right over the anchor tattoo. "You stay." Dominic looked at his son, then looked back down the hallway toward the dark bedroom where Gabriel was finally peacefully sleeping. "Yeah, kid," Dominic said, his voice thick. "I stay." 3 days later, the rain finally stopped. The morning sun broke through the smog of the city, hitting the grimy window of the apartment and casting long golden rectangles across the floor. The air inside the apartment was entirely different. The bleach and damp mold were gone, completely eclipsed by the rich, intertwining scents of dark ozone and crisp cardamom. Dominic stood by the front door, slipping his arms into a heavy leather jacket. He watched as Gabriel moved around the kitchen, packing a single battered canvas duffel bag. Gabriel looked entirely different. The fever had broken 30 hours ago. He was still pale, and he still favored his left hip, but the desperate, hunted look in his eyes had vanished. His skin had lost that sickly chemical pallor. Without the blockers poisoning his system, his natural omega biology was bouncing back vibrant and sharp. He folded a pair of Toby's jeans and shoved them into the bag. "Leave it," Dominic said, stepping away from the door. Gabriel paused, looking up. "What? Leave it all," Dominic repeated. He walked over to the kitchen, stepping carefully around the debris of the collapsed island they hadn't bothered to clean up. He reached out gently, gripping Gabriel's wrist to stop him from packing a worn-out gray sweater. "Where we're going, you won't need this." "Dom, we can't just take nothing. The boys need their clothes. They need their toys." "I bought a place in Montana," Dominic said quietly. "A cabin. 300 acres of timberland 30 miles from the nearest town. It's off the grid under a dummy corporation that Arthur's accountants have never heard of. I had a courier drop off a bag in a locker at the bus station this morning. Cash new passports and a set of keys. The cabin is fully stocked." Gabriel stared at him, the reality of the escape finally taking root. "Montana. There are no corner boys. There's no syndicate." Dominic promised his thumb rubbing slow circles over the inside of Gabriel's wrist. "Just pine trees, a lake, and enough space for them to be loud without neighbors complaining." Gabriel swallowed hard. He looked around the tiny, peeling apartment. This place had been his prison, but it had also been his sanctuary. It was where his boys had taken their first steps, where they had spoken their first words. Okay. Gabriel breathed, letting the gray sweater fall from his fingers. "Okay, let's go." A loud clatter came from the hallway. Leo and Toby came charging out of the bedroom, fully dressed in mismatched clothes, Toby clutching his mangled plastic T-Rex. "Are we taking a plane?" Leo demanded, running up to Dominic and grabbing the leg of his trousers, completely unbothered by the fearsome alpha presence. "We're taking a car," Dominic corrected, looking down at the boy. "A long drive." Toby wandered over to Gabriel, tugging on his hand. "Daddy, my dinosaur is broken." He held up the green plastic toy. One of the tiny plastic arms had snapped off during the table incident. Gabriel knelt down, wincing slightly as his hip protested, and took the toy. "We'll get you a new one, Tobes, a bigger one." Toby looked at Dominic. "Does he buy it?" Gabriel looked up at Dominic, a slow, genuine smile finally breaking across his face. It was the smile Dominic hadn't seen in 5 years, the one that reached his hazel eyes, the one that made the brutal, cynical world melt away. "Yes," Gabriel said softly. "He buys it." Dominic stepped forward, crouching down next to Gabriel. He was a massive shadow in the small room, but he moved with a deliberate, agonizing gentleness. He reached out and scooped Toby up with one arm, settling the boy on his broad shoulder, entirely avoiding Gabriel's bad hip. With his other hand, he reached out to Leo. Leo didn't hesitate. He grabbed Dominic's fingers with his small, sticky hand. Dominic looked at Gabriel. The Omega was staring at Dominic's left forearm, the sleeve pushed up, exposing the ugly, blown-out tattoo. The anchor wrapped in barbed wire. "I was terrified when I did that," Gabriel whispered, reaching out to trace the jagged black lines with a trembling fingertip. "I was 20, sitting in a safe house with a needle, terrified that you were going to walk out the door and never come back. I wanted to tie you down. Anchor you." Dominic looked at his mate. He remembered the sting of the needle, the smell of the India ink, the fierce, possessive determination in Gabriel's young eyes. "It worked," Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp of absolute truth. "Even when you were gone, it worked. You kept me tethered. You brought me back." Gabriel nodded, tears shining in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He stood up, leaving the canvas bag on the counter. He walked over to the front door, placed his hand on the deadbolt, and turned it. The heavy lock clicked open, sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. He didn't look back at the peeling wallpaper or the broken table. He looked at the giant man holding his children. "Let's go home, Dom," Gabriel said. Dominic stood up, the weight of his sons finally miraculously safe in his arms. He walked through the open door, leaving the Rossi Empire, the blood and the darkness behind them, stepping out into the cold, clean morning air. Did Dominic and Gabriel's brutal, beautiful journey break your heart and put it back together? If you loved this deep dive into the raw, fiercely protective world of the Omegaverse, hit that like button. Right now, it really helps support the channel. Share this story with a friend who loves a gritty, emotional Mafia redemption arc. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. so you never miss our next intense audio drama. What was your favorite moment? Tell us in the comments below.